The construction worker's shovel scraped something hard in the dirt, a human thigh bone. Then another, and another. By the time police arrived at 36 Craven Street in London, over 1,200 pieces of human bone were being pulled from a pit beneath the basement floor. 6 of the bodies were children. But this wasn't the beginning of the horror. This was the end. The elegant Georgian townhouse had once been home to one of America's founding fathers. Benjamin Franklin lived here for nearly 2 decades, writing letters to Congress and conducting experiments. The bones had been buried during his time there, in a windowless room beneath his garden. What happened in Franklin's basement would remain hidden for over 200 years. December 1997, London. The 4-story townhouse at 36 Craven Street stood quiet between the Thames and Trafalgar Square. For centuries, it had housed doctors, merchants, families. Now, a preservation group called Friends of Benjamin Franklin House was transforming the dilapidated building into a museum. Jim Field had been working construction for 20 years. Nothing surprised him anymore. But on this particular morning, as he dug into the basement foundation, his shovel hit something that made him stop. The basement room was windowless, tucked beneath what had once been Franklin's garden. The walls were thick Georgian brick. Whatever happened here happened in complete darkness. He bent down, brushed away dirt, stared. A bone. Human. Unmistakably human. Field called his supervisor. The supervisor called the police. Detective Inspector Jim O'Connell would later say, "In my 30 years in the police service, this is the first private address I've been to where bones were found actually concealed in the property." They started digging carefully. From a pit just 3 feet wide and 3 feet deep, they pulled bone after bone after bone. Femurs, skulls, ribs, vertebrae. Small bones that could only belong to children. A forensic team arrived. Anthropologists, historians. Everyone asked the same question. Whose bones were these? Then someone checked the property records. From 1757 to 1775, this house's most famous tenant had been Benjamin Franklin. The bones were dated to approximately 200 years old. They had been buried while Franklin lived here. They had no idea what they were about to uncover. The coroner's initial report was chilling. At least 15 individuals, scattered throughout the pit in no particular order. The bones showed something that immediately ruled out normal burial: cut marks, clean, precise incisions made by surgical instruments. Every femur had been sawed through, demonstrating amputation techniques. Skulls bore perfect circular holes drilled by a trepanning device, an instrument used to relieve pressure on the brain by cutting into the skull. Scalpel marks scored the surfaces where someone had carefully dissected muscle from bone. These weren't murder victims. These were specimens. But who would need 15 bodies for study? And why hide them in Benjamin Franklin's basement? The investigation shifted from crime scene to historical mystery. Researchers at University College London's Institute of Archaeology took over, meticulously cataloging every fragment. They found something else in the pit that told them exactly when this happened. Among the human bones, turtle vertebrae, and embedded in one turtle shell, a tiny bead of mercury. In 1770, at the Royal Society of London, a young surgeon named William Hewson had conducted a groundbreaking experiment. He injected mercury through a turtle's vascular system, mapping the lymphatic pathways in a way no one had seen before. The experiment earned him the Royal Society's prestigious Copley Medal. The same William Hewson who had married Polly Stevenson, whose mother-in-law, Margaret Stevenson, owned 36 Craven Street, who had lived in this very house from 1770 to 1774. But what police found next made the story even darker. William Hewson wasn't just any surgeon. He was a prodigy. At 27, he'd been studying under William Hunter, the most renowned anatomist in Georgian England. Hunter ran a private anatomy school where wealthy students paid to learn dissection, a practice that existed in a legal gray area. In 1770, Hewson and Hunter had a catastrophic falling out. The dispute grew so bitter that Benjamin Franklin himself attempted to mediate. Franklin wrote letters back and forth, trying to salvage the professional relationship. He failed. Hewson needed a new location for his work. His mother-in-law had space. His friend, Franklin, was a champion of scientific progress, someone who valued knowledge above convention. Number 36. Craven Street became Hewson's secret anatomy school. Here's what made the location perfect. The house sat on a street with a Thames wharf at one end and public gallows at the other. In the 1770s, a shadowy industry thrived in London. They were called resurrectionists, body snatchers. They robbed fresh graves under cover of darkness, loaded corpses onto boats, and delivered them to anatomy schools willing to pay. The 1752 Murder Act allowed dissection of executed criminals, but it produced maybe 10 bodies per year. Medical schools and private anatomists needed hundreds. The resurrectionists filled the gap, charging £4 per adult body, nearly £600 in today's money. Bodies could be smuggled from cemeteries via the Thames, brought right to Craven Street's back entrance, or collected from the gallows less than a block away. Hewson would receive them in the windowless basement room, far from prying eyes. The autopsy results revealed something even more horrifying than anyone expected. 6 of the 15 bodies belonged to children. Researchers found tiny bones, a 6-year-old's femur, infant skull fragments, vertebrae from teenagers. In Georgian England, children's bodies were considered especially valuable for anatomical study. Their smaller skeletons demonstrated developmental stages. They were easier to dissect completely, and they were easier to steal. Parish graveyards held hundreds of poor children who died from disease and malnutrition. No one kept careful records. No one would notice if a fresh grave was disturbed. The resurrectionists knew this. Children's bodies commanded premium prices. Hewson's students would have gathered in the basement by candlelight. The room had no windows, purposefully. No one could see in. The bodies would be laid on wooden tables, preserved with salt when necessary. Hewson would demonstrate incisions, explain anatomy, let students practice on the corpses. Above them, life continued normally. Franklin conducted his diplomatic work. Margaret Stevenson managed the household. Polly Hewson tended to her young son. No one questioned the surgeon's long hours in the basement. Evidence suggests Hewson performed dissections for at least 4 years. 4 years of bodies smuggled through London's darkness. 4 years of surgical practice on stolen corpses. 4 years of remains piling up in the pit beneath the garden. When he finished with each body, Hewson faced a problem. How to dispose of the evidence without transporting remains through London's streets and risking arrest. But nothing could prepare them for what they realized about Franklin's involvement. Franklin knew. He had to know. The evidence is circumstantial but damning. Franklin helped Hewson secure his position. Franklin mediated Hewson's professional disputes. Franklin lived in the house during the anatomy school's entire operation. The basement was directly beneath his rooms. Whether Franklin ever attended a dissection remains unknown. Marcia Baliciano, director of the Benjamin Franklin House Museum, believes he probably didn't participate. Franklin's interests lay in physics and electricity, not medicine. But Franklin was a man of science, a champion of knowledge. He would have understood what Hewson was doing, and he would have approved. William Hewson never faced justice for the bodies in the basement. In 1774, while performing a dissection, he accidentally cut his hand with a scalpel contaminated by a cadaver. The wound became infected. Within days, sepsis spread through his body. He died at age 34, leaving Polly a widow with 3 young children. Franklin returned to America in 1775, never speaking publicly about what happened at Craven Street. He signed the Declaration of Independence, helped draft the Constitution, and became one of history's most celebrated figures. The secret remained buried, literally, beneath his London home. For over 2 centuries, the bones lay undisturbed in their shallow pit. The house changed hands dozens of times. Families lived there, unaware of what rested beneath their feet. The windowless basement room became a storage space, then a coal cellar, then forgotten entirely. When Jim Field unearthed that first thigh bone in 1997, he set off an investigation that would rewrite our understanding of 18th century medical education. The 1,200 bone fragments told a story of desperate scientific ambition, illegal body trade, and the dark side of Enlightenment-era progress. The Anatomy Act of 1832 finally legalized the donation of bodies to medical schools, ending the resurrection trade. But it came 58 years too late for the people buried at 36 Craven Street. Today, the Benjamin Franklin House operates as a museum. Visitors can tour the rooms where Franklin conducted experiments and wrote letters that shaped American independence. The basement is part of the tour. The bone pit has been preserved, marked with a plaque explaining what happened there. Some of the bones remain on display: a skull with its trepanning hole, a sawed femur, the turtle vertebrae with its mercury bead. To this day, 15 people lie in the basement of 36 Craven Street. Their names are unknown. Their families never knew what became of them. They were stolen from graves, dissected for science, and buried in a pit beneath a founding father's garden. Their only memorial is the truth that took 200 years to surface.